November 12, 1942. Western Desert, North Africa. Dust hangs in the morning heat as a captured American runabout sits half-buried off a torn-up British supply line. Its crew is gone. The ammunition boxes are empty. The paint is blistered with sun and sand. By the book, it should be smashed and abandoned. But an officer in a sun-faded cap says something that will open a door no one expects. Bring the best mechanic. I want to know if we can make this thing ours. What they discover over the next half hour doesn't arrive like thunder. It creeps in, bolt by bolt, label by label, until the certainty of German superiority begins to wobble. A small tag on the dash reads Willys MB. The Americans have a nickname for it. Jeep. The hood comes up, silence, then a low whistle. Everything is laid out like a picture book, wires in clean, sensible colors. Parts stamped and marked so even a sleepy farmhand could find them. No fussy specialty wrenches. No hand-fit tolerances that demand master. Craftsman on a good day with the wind in his favor. 20 years of fixing precision machines has not prepared the senior mechanic for this kind of kindness. Every fastener is standard. Every component appears interchangeable. The engine, 134 cubic inches, roughly 60 horsepower at 4,000 turns, is not trying to impress anyone at a cocktail party. It is trying to start every morning and keep running after a week of abuse. The philosophy hits like a quiet revelation. This iron isn't engineered for perfection. It's engineered for production, for survival, for people who don't have time to ask a factory for permission. Look closer. One lever. One drops the little truck into four-wheel drive. No choreography of pedals and knobs. No cheat sheet needed. In soft sand, in sticky mud, in snow you can taste in the air, that single motion means motion. Our light car, the tidy, thoughtful Type 82, sips fuel and uses an air-cooled heart that never worries about a punctured radiator. Brilliant on paper, elegant on a test stand, but it drives only its rear wheels. In the desert's flour-fine sand, on Italy's goat tracks, in Russia's bottomless spring, that becomes a sentence. The suspension is plain leaf springs, crude to the eye, immortal under a hammer. The electrics are simple, the fuel system tolerant. The frame looks heavy for its size, like a boxer with thick bones. That excess weight isn't a mistake. It's muscle over joints that will be kicked, dropped, and overburdened every single day. You can almost hear the designers say, they will overload it, build it to forgive. By late 42, the contrast isn't just technical. It's cultural. America is going to build more than 640,000 of these little beasts. Germany will make just over 50,000 of its counterpart. The numbers do not argue. They smother. 3 days of testing follow. Sand bowls that trap rear-drive cars like flypaper. Rutted climbs that turn careful technique into a prayer. Overloads that would make an engineer blush. The little capture truck shrugs and mounts the next hill. Low range lets it crawl like a man on hands and knees, all four corners digging together. Word starts to move along the line, carried in mess tins and mail. The Americans have a machine that does what you tell it without complaining. And there are oceans of them. Officers come to look. They circle, frown, prod. The senior mechanic chooses his words like a man defusing a shell. This is designed by someone who has lived in the field, a cold reply. German engineering is the finest in the world. A nod, then a gesture at that stubborn, simple lever. Finest is not always the same as most useful. A supply man who once worked in an auto plant spends an afternoon with the vehicle and finally says the quiet part out loud. We build for precision. They build for manufacturability. In a total war, the second wins more often than the first. He points at stamped panels. They're not pretty. They are repeatable. He points at the block. It is cast, not caressed. It loses a little refinement to gain a tidal wave of speed in production and teaches a world-changing lesson. A worker can be trained in days to do one step perfectly 1,000 times. Let your mind drift across an ocean to the assembly lines. Factories that made refrigerators are now pressing body panels. Plants that stamped washing machine tubs are stamping frames. Trucks roll out so fast the paperwork chases them. One plant will push a heavy bomber off the line in about an hour at its peak. Shipyards are belching out cargo ships faster than torpedoes can find them. The statistics stop feeling like numbers and start feeling like weather. Inescapable, everywhere. The captured Jeep becomes a celebrity. It's the car you borrowed just for a minute and never quite returned. Mechanics trade notes and parts as if they were currency. A shadow market forms because everyone knows. In this landscape, for driven wheels and a forgiving frame are worth more than pride. Then Tunisia falls, May 13th, 1943. 250,000 Axis troops raise their hands. The road to captivity is paved in American logistics. Prisoners ride in trucks that come by the dozens. Trucks that would take horse-drawn columns a week to match. Liberty ships swallow them by the thousand. The transit feels like a factory door that never closes. In a motor pool at a processing center, a boy-faced sergeant shows a captured mechanic the magic trick: bins of parts that actually arrive, tools in the right sizes, manuals with drawings that a farm kid can follow at a glance. See, the sergeant says, "We build so anyone can fix it." Color-coded wires, labels a child could love, bolts that match across vehicles. If it breaks, we replace it. If we don't have the part, we use the one that fits from the truck over there. Component commonality. It sounds boring until you realize it is the quiet engine that drives a modern army. Fewer unique parts, more of each, faster everywhere. On the way across America, the lesson repeats. Ports where cranes dance like metronomes. Rail lines that hum like arteries. Parking lots full of cars for civilians, even while the war gulps steel. Depots where vehicles wait, not for months, but for the next train. In a Texas camp, German mechanics work alongside American soldiers, keeping the base moving. The American way is shamelessly practical. Keep it running, keep it simple, keep it moving. If a machine is too far gone, cannibalize it, file the request, and a replacement appears before the ink dries. One day, a former Ford man, now in uniform, smiles and tells a story that sounds like a tall tale until you see the sea of machines behind him. At Willow Run, by the time I left, we were finishing one big 4-engine bomber about every hour. He taps the Jeep's fender. Same logic here. Willys builds them. Ford builds them. Parts swap straight across. If one plant goes dark, the other keeps the river flowing. The German mechanic thinks about his own supply charts, the mess of different trucks, the grab bag of captured gear, the labyrinth of part numbers, and feels something inside him quietly give way. By the summer of '44, rumors have turned into headlines. An invasion across the channel. Beaches carpeted not only with men, but with machines. Thousands of vehicles in the first waves. The assault is carried on ships built by the hundreds, escorted by planes built by the thousands. Where a German division counts horses, the Americans count engines. You start to see the war not as a contest of tactics, but as a contest of throughput. Here's the part we don't like to say out loud. German tanks are often better on paper. German small arms are exquisite. German aircraft can be breathtaking, but a better machine loses to 5 good enough machines that never stop arriving. It's not romance. It's math. In a depot yard, a line of privates drives Jeeps up ramps 2 at a time. In less than an hour, more vehicles have been loaded than some divisions saw in their entire North African tour. This is not an exception. It is Tuesday. By 1943, around 80% of German divisions lean on hooves, not axles. The army enters the war with more than 500,000 horses and will employ millions by the end. Over 2 million animals will die doing a job a truck can do in a third of the time. American columns, fully motorized, eat kilometers for breakfast. The pace of war itself changes when you stop tying movement to the step of a horse. Winter comes, and with it the Ardennes. There's a last throw of the dice, a counteroffensive that burns fuel faster than it can be found. There are commandos in captured uniforms riding captured cars, trying to twist signposts and seize bridges. The gambit stings, then sputters. The tanks stop not because they are destroyed, but because the fuel bows out. The lesson is brutal and simple. Logistics is strategy with its sleeves rolled up. Spring, 1945. The end. Across a continent of ruins, the same little American trucks dart between. Piles of brick, towing, hauling, ferrying officers and food and hope. A former enemy mechanic with decent English and a battered work record asks for a job. He gets one. Occupation script buys bread. Wrenches by tomorrow. He teaches young countrymen a new mantra. Simplify, standardize, design so the man with the spanner can reach the bolt without swearing. By 47, he's supervising. Evenings bring strange conversations. What would a vehicle for the new Europe look like? Smaller, thriftier, but built with the same logic. Common bits, easy service, designed to be built fast and fixed faster. As reconstruction money flows and factories wake up, an industrial hybrid takes shape. German precision yoked to American flow. The proof will arrive in assembly halls and export figures, in familiar round shapes that buzz along narrow streets, in production numbers that climb like a sunrise. Decades pass. Reunions grow thinner. In a museum hall, old hands gather around a restored Willys, running fingers along the hood as if reading Braille from another life. They speak without bitterness. We built perfection, one says softly. They built production. Heads nod. Silence. Understanding. Here is the uncomfortable truth they carry home. The Jeep was not better in a peacetime sense. It was better suited to the reality they actually lived: mud, sand, cold, heat, shortages, misloads, abuse. It was a machine designed to be misused and to forgive the misuse. It was a part in a system designed to keep moving even when parts broke. That is why it won more than any single battle did. You can trace that philosophy like a river through post-war factories, standard parts, simplified assemblies, manuals with pictures instead of poetry. The notion that reliability under punishment beats elegance under glass. Those ideas do not stay in motor pools. They climb into everything. Cars, ships, washing machines, the entire spine of an economy. And yet, for all that, one number still waits in the wings, a number so audacious it changed how men counted the war itself. It didn't live under a hood or behind a gearbox. It lived on a line where workers mastered one tiny step, then made greatness out of repetition. You've heard the whispers. One heavy bomber. Every 63 minutes at peak. Imagine what that rhythm does when applied to trucks, to landing craft, to the humble little 4x4 that could be taught to any farm boy in an afternoon. Before we talk about what that cadence meant when the beaches filled with steel and the roads filled with dust, before we pull the last thread that ties field simplicity to global victory, ask yourself this. In a world at war, would you bet on a flawless machine or on a simple machine you could build by the 100,000? Tell me in the comments which side you'd pick and why. Then, keep listening. The most unsettling lesson the Jeep taught its enemies hasn't arrived yet. Here's that cadence, the drumbeat no. Shell could silence. A line that never sleeps. A worker fits one bracket. Another tightens two bolts. A third checks a gauge. None of them builds a vehicle. All of them build momentum. Out the other end comes a Jeep that will start in the cold, pull a trailer through a ditch, and forgive the ham-fisted shift of a kid who learned yesterday which pedal is which. Now imagine this. The same throttle pressed down across an entire nation. Trucks in columns that look like rivers with headlights. Depots that restock before they run out. Manuals so clear you can fix the fault you've never seen. The secret isn't a miracle machine. It's a simple machine inside a miracle system. And systems have fingerprints, standard fuel cans that two men can carry at a run and stack like bricks, pallets and crates that fit into ships, onto trains, onto trucks without measuring twice, tires that match across models, filters that thread onto anything with the same kind of engine, a signal core that wires a field phone with the same discipline a factory wires a dashboard. The enemy has masterpieces. The Americans have multiplication. On a rain-polished road in France, autumn 1944, the supply lines are a moving city. You can smell the diesel and hot rubber. Trucks rumble through the night, blackout, slits glowing like tired eyes. Drivers swap seats without swapping instruction. Clutch, shift, go. Behind them, a phalanx of 4x4s fans out like ants, each carrying a bite-sized load that adds up to feast. Call it the Red Ball, call it a miracle, call it what you like. The truth is simpler. When your trucks never stop, your advance doesn't either. The little captured runabout, the one we lifted out of the sand months ago, wasn't an isolated wonder. It was the scout for a philosophy. If a job can be done with a smaller part, do it. If two parts can be the same, make them the same. If a task can be taught in pictures, draw the pictures. If a repair needs clearance, move the bolt where a gloved hand can reach it in the dark. You see it in the frame rails. Holes where cross members can accept multiple fittings. You see it in the wiring. Colors that tell stories even when the labels wear off. You see it in the tool roll. Wrenches size for everything that matters, nothing that doesn't. This is mercy for mechanics, and mercy for mechanics is mercy for armies. There's a moment in every workshop when a philosophy becomes a habit. A Jeep limps in on 3 good plugs and 1 stubborn cough. In another army, you file a form. Here, you swap plugs with the truck next door, get this one back out, and fix the donor in the same breath. You don't stop the river to fish out a single leaf. You can chart this on a map. Beaches that bloom into ports made of pieces floated across the sea. Pipelines that crawl along the seabed, turning distance into a rumor. Temporary roads that spill from steel barges, unfold, pin down, and carry weight an engineer on a blackboard would never approve. All of it built from parts simple enough to make and strong enough to abuse. And the philosophy travels both ways. The Americans borrow a can design that pours clean, stamps fast, and stacks better than anything they brought from home. They copy it shamelessly. They make $1 million. They keep the good and file away the rest. Winning doesn't care where an idea was born. It cares how fast the idea can be multiplied. Back at a prisoner camp's motor pool, a mechanic from Bremen and a sergeant from Ohio lean over the same open hood and find themselves speaking the same language. Torque values, thread pitches, the sigh you make when a bolt rounds off. The German admits what the desert began to teach him. We built to be admired. You built to be used. The sergeant grins. If it runs, it wins. Was it really that simple? No. Tactics matter. Courage matters. Weather, terrain, luck, these all stand in the doorway. But you don't get through the doorway at all if you can't keep the wheels turning. Let's talk about the human piece, the part rarely drawn in blueprints, training. In another arsenal, you teach a man to baby a temperamental system. Here, you teach him not to need to flip the lever, engage the front axle, use low range. The vehicle forgives the learner. The learner becomes confident. Confidence becomes speed. Speed becomes inevitability. Do not underestimate inevitability. By winter, the men who once rolled their eyes at the crude little 4x4 ask for it by name. Officers volunteer for the uncomfortable seat and the wind in their teeth because they trust what happens when they tug that lever and feel the front end bite. In mountains where roads forget to be roads, in rivers that pretend to be roads, in fields trying very hard to be lakes, the same truth repeats. Simple beats stuck. Meanwhile, the arithmetic keeps writing the future. In the time it takes a craftsman to hand-fit perfection, 3 good enough machines leave the factory, hit the dock, cross the water, and nose down a French lane lined with shell-scarred trees. When 1 breaks, 2 remain. When 2 break, the 4th and 5th arrive. Attrition's favorite feast is complexity. Abundance starves it. There's a story from a depot yard where a young lieutenant complains that men are treating vehicles like they're disposable. An older captain shakes his head. They're not disposable, he says. They're replaceable. Big difference. We replace to keep momentum. That's how you spend steel instead of blood. Listen to that last line. It's the thesis of an industrial war. By spring, a captured mechanic writes home, carefully, in a tone that won't upset the censor, and describes something he never expected to admire. Humility in design. A frame overbuilt to take a hit. An engine that accepts dirty fuel and bad shifts and keeps pulling. A steering box that isn't numb but doesn't mind being yanked. He describes manuals that assume the reader is smart but busy. He describes a system that treats the mechanic like a partner, not a priest. Years later, he will stand in a rebuilt plant and ask a new question. How do we make the worker's day easier? That question, more than any single machine, will rebuild a nation. But first, the last winter must break. In the Ardennes, tanks stall not for lack of steel, but for lack of liquid. Fuel that never arrives because horses can't carry enough and trucks can't be everywhere at once when there aren't enough of them to begin with. Commandos wearing borrowed uniforms try to turn road signs and sow panic in a language they don't quite speak. Some slip through, some don't. The offensive fades the way. Fire fades when the wood is gone. When it's done, the roads are full again. The same little 4x4s roll back out, towing trailers fat with jerrycans stacked like a wall. Engines burble at idle, patient as farm dogs. They pull staff officers forward. They yank artillery into place. They ferry stretcher-bound men away from the front. They carry mail that smells faintly of home. They do 100 small jobs so the spectacular jobs can happen. And they do it in numbers that make heroism a routine. I want you to think about that. Heroism as routine. Not the kind that sprints through machine gun fire, though there is plenty of that. The kind that changes oil on time, sets valve lash correctly, and tightens a clamp before it leaks. The kind that swaps a differential in the dirt in an hour because the manual is clear and the parts actually fit. The kind that keeps momentum from ever becoming a question. What did the little runabout teach in the end? 3 laws of modern war and modern work. Mobility. If you can move when the enemy can't, you choose the fight. Maintainability. If you can fix it faster than it breaks, you never stop. Multiplicity. If you can build enough, you don't need perfect. Carve those on a shop wall, and you'll build more than vehicles. You'll build an economy. And we haven't even stepped into the last room yet. The one with the ledger where numbers turn into outcomes, where a factory's hourly rhythm writes what happens on a battlefield at dawn. In that room, one more truth is waiting, a truth so plain it hides in open sight. The simplest machines produce the fastest, change the world the most. Before we open that door, tell me this in the comments. What detail surprised you more? The single lever that makes 4 wheels pull, or the idea that a manual written for a 6th grader can win a general's campaign? I'm reading your answers. Stay with me. The final piece. The reason this humble 4x4 became the most respected shape at ground level comes next. Open the ledger door. Listen to the pencil scratch. Numbers don't swagger. They settle arguments. In late 1942, analysts lay columns side by side, and the page becomes a battlefield of ink. America. Military vehicles by the thousands per day. Germany, Italy, Japan combined. Fewer. The verdict isn't shouted. It's totaled. Put 1-star comparison under a lamp. In 1943, the United States rolls out over 2 million military vehicles of all kinds. Germany's total, counting everything with wheels, doesn't reach 100,000. Now translate production into presence. It means supply columns that look like parades, motor pools that resemble cities, and a front line where loss is an inconvenience, not a paralysis. And then there's the hour hand that stunned visiting eyes. At Willow Run, a heavy bomber finished at peak about every 63 minutes. Not a rumor, a rhythm. While that metronome ticks, shipyards on both coasts launch Liberty vessels in weeks, not months. You can argue doctrine until your voice cracks. You cannot argue with a dock that never empties. Now turn the page to the beaches. The morning sky goes from quiet to crowded. Thousands of ships, more than 10,000 aircraft, and, in the first surge, about 150,000 men stepping on a hostile sand with vehicles in the very first wave. Jeeps nose down. Ramps and fan out like mercury, becoming legs for officers, eyes for scouts, shoulders for stretcher teams. Hours later, more arrive. Days later, the beachheads are not lines. They are funnels. And here's a footnote that feels like a punchline. The Americans publish a manual for the captured German light car. Clear diagrams, procedures, the whole lot, so their mechanics can run enemy machines when they capture them. June 6, 1944, that manual goes out. The Germans don't need a matching book for the Jeep. The Jeep teaches itself. Turn the key. Pull the lever. Go. We have to talk about the mischief in the Ardennes. Commandos in stolen uniforms drive stolen vehicles and try to twist the front line into knots. It almost works, until questions about baseball scores and road protocols and little cultural tells unravel the disguise. The offensive itself runs on hope and dwindling fuel. Tanks halt not because enemy shells have cored them, but because the cans never come. The horse, the brave, exhausted horse, cannot carry enough gasoline to keep a modern attack alive. Back in a Texas motor pool, the capture mechanic learns an American superstition that isn't superstition at all. If two parts can be the same, make them the same. Bolts, filters, bearings, switches. The point isn't beauty. The point is velocity. The point is that a soldier reaching blind behind a hot engine at midnight finds the same connector he found yesterday. Months become years. The war snaps shut like a book, and the story most men tell is the one about battles. But a parallel story keeps walking. The story of practices. Manuals written like comic strips, so a man with 6 hours of sleep can still do it right. Tool rooms that hand over what you need because the part numbers across half the fleet actually match. Leaders who understand that a vehicle is not sacred. The mission is sacred. Replace the machine to save the momentum. Spend steel instead of blood. Now watch what happens when those habits leap the fence from war to peace. A former prisoner returns to a broken city and steps into an American-run motor pool as a civilian. He trains apprentices the way the manuals trained him. Pictures first, then torque specs, then the why. Make the worker's day easier, he says out loud one afternoon, startling himself with the simplicity of it. That sentence becomes a blueprint. Factories wake. Conveyor belts move not just parts but ideas. Designed for manufacturability, standardize across models, assume. The mechanic's glove and the customer's rainy morning. The little truths of the Jeep's engine bay, access, interchangeability, forgiveness, sneak into sedans and vans and tractors. In a country that once built masterpieces by the dozen now builds excellence by the million. Decades later, men with silver hair stand around a restored Willys in a museum's quiet light. They do not argue anymore. One touches the hood and smiles at the memory of a lever that never lied. Another, who once signed reports, with careful, neat handwriting, clears his throat. We built to be praised. They built to be produced. The battlefield preferred the latter. Heads nod. No one is offended by the truth anymore. Time has sanded the edges off pride and left only the grain. There's one more thread to pull, and it's the most controversial because it offends our love of the singular hero. We want the war to have been won by the best tank, the bravest charge, the perfect tactic, but when historians interviewed defeated generals, the praise that surprised them most was for a small, flat-fendered truck with a square face. Not the heavy bomber, not the medium tank, not the big gun. The Jeep, because it represented a philosophy. It was the tip of a spear made of production, and when a statesman later called it a nation's greatest contribution to modern warfare, it wasn't flattery for a cute machine. It was recognition that the machine carried inside it the instructions for victory. Standardize, simplify, multiply, and do it fast. Let's lay down the 3 laws once more, but sharper. Make it move anywhere. Make it fixable by anyone. Make so many that failure is noise, not news. If you build your life, your business, your team with those in mind, you are in a strange way building a motor pool in peacetime. And momentum loves motor pools. Now I want your judgment. Which principle do you think mattered most? Mobility, maintainability, or multiplicity? Drop your pick below and defend it. If you've ever wrenched on something in the field, tell us what details saved your day. Your stories make this channel smarter. We're not done. The last reveal is bigger than numbers and broader than battlefields. How a generation of defeated mechanics carried these lessons into peacetime and helped turn ruins into an export miracle. How a philosophy born in dust and diesel built homes, jobs, and a future. That's the end game, and it's closer than you think. If this journey has kept you glued here, stick with me. The finish will change how you look at every machine you touch. The end game begins not with a parade, but with a question on a factory floor. What if we design so the worker succeeds by default? That thought, carried home by men who once turned wrenches in foreign motor pools, becomes a quiet revolution. Jigs appear where guesswork used to live. Parts are shared across models instead of reinvented for each batch. Engineering drawings stop showing off and start showing how. A foreman holds up 2 parts with the same job and asks, "Why are these different?" No one has a good answer. The difference disappears. A designer moves a fastener half an inch so a gloved hand can reach it without removing 3 other panels. A production planner redraws a line so subassemblies click together with a satisfying inevitability. The worker's day gets easier. Throughput climbs, quality follows, not because inspectors glare harder, but because the process leaves fewer places to hide mistakes. Meanwhile, the small, round car with an air-cooled heart becomes a symbol of something larger. Precision moderated by mercy for the mechanic, economy that doesn't punish the owner, a factory cadence that can hold a tune for years. It's not a copy of a wartime runabout. It's a translation of its principles into peacetime prose, simple to build, simpler to maintain, indifferent to weather and roads that haven't forgiven the war yet. Suddenly, Europe is full of honest vehicles that start on cold mornings and carry families where trains do not go. Listen to a shop class in 1951. The instructor is a former sergeant, a patient man with permanently blackened fingers. He lays out 3 truths on the bench like tools. If it can be the same, make it the same. If it must be different, make the difference obvious. If it's hard to reach, you designed it wrong. His students, some in borrowed coats, some with pockets full of scrap bolts, nod because they've lived the cost of the opposite. They carry those rules into the plants that rise from rubble. A decade later, the country that once tried to craft perfection now crafts patience at scale. Lines that don't jam when one operator steps away, feeders that don't starve the station behind them, fixtures that embrace the part instead of wrestling it. The miracle isn't that quality returns. It's that quality learns to dance with quantity. But the ghost of the war never quite leaves the room. On a shelf sits a faded manual with diagrams that could teach a 17-year-old to rebuild a gearbox. Next to it is a hand-lettered sign. Draw it so the new kid wins. It's a creed that reaches far beyond automobiles. Appliances open with normal tools. Radios use modular boards. Tractors accept the same filters as the lorries that delivered their steel. 1,000 small mercies add up to an economy that forgives error and rewards effort. Somewhere, in a museum that smells of wax and oil, veterans gather around a square-faced, flat-fendered truck. They trade stories, deserts that felt like oceans, mountains that felt like walls, afternoons when a stubby lever saved an entire convoy. One man, who used to write reports that never reached the front in time, runs a hand along the hood and says softly, "This little thing taught us to count correctly." Another chuckles, "It taught us to stop worshiping cleverness and start worshiping completion." What made the lesson stick wasn't just abundance. It was abundance that behaved. When you standardize, your warehouses shrink in complexity even as they grow in power. When you simplify, your training shortens and your confidence lengthens. When you embrace interchangeability, improvisation becomes policy instead of sin. You don't merely have more. You have more that fits everywhere. Roll that forward to the moment the battlefield turned into a building site. Trucks that once hauled ammunition now haul bricks. The same philosophy that pulled guns through mud now pulls economies through scarcity. Keep it moving, keep it fixable, keep it flowing. On drafting tables across a recovering continent, you can see the fingerprints. Fasteners are chosen for how many places they'll serve. Wiring looms share colors across product lines. Assemblies drop in a place like well-told stories. An executive tours a plant and asks why a station waits for a part that arrives off-cycle. A young engineer answers with a diagram. Because these two families of products don't share this. Subassembly. The executive raises an eyebrow. 2 months later, they do. Lead times fall. Costs follow. The ledger smiles in the sober way ledgers do. All this from a machine that would blush if you called it elegant. But let's not romanticize the hardware and forget the humans. The little 4x4's greatest gift was psychological. It taught an entire generation of mechanics that design could respect their time. A bolt head the right size is a love letter. A drain plug you can reach without. Contortion acknowledges that the designer has changed oil in the rain. A part number that matches across the fleet is a handshake between the draftsman and the depot. Respect begets pride, and pride begets care, and care, multiplied by a nation, begets prosperity. Time marches. The square-faced scout yields to larger machines, new doctrines, different wars. But the lineage is obvious to anyone who has ever crawled under a chassis with a flashlight and a bad attitude. You can trace the genealogy. Through every design that chooses access over artistry, clarity over cleverness, repeatability over romance. Even when the badge changes, the philosophy does not. And what are the men who first learned this lesson in captivity? Some never spoke of it. Others taught apprentices, wrote shop manuals, argued in meetings for fixtures that cost money today and save fortunes tomorrow. They were not heroes in the storybook sense. They were midwives to a way of thinking. Nations are built by people like that. Quiet insistence, stubborn practicality, the refusal to make the same mistake twice. There's one last scene I want you to carry with you. A young engineer in a crisp shirt stands before a board and proposes a beautiful solution to a problem that has cost the company months. The room hums with admiration until an older man in the back, sleeves rolled, asks one question. How many times can we build it in a day? The engineer hesitates. The older man nods toward the door. Come with me, he says, and we'll make it so the answer is as many as we need. That is the inheritance of the little truck with the one honest lever. Not nostalgia, not myth, a discipline. Build for the conditions you will face, not the conditions you prefer. Respect the user, respect the fixer, respect the clock. If that simple creed reshaped a war and then rebuild a continent, imagine what it could do in your shop, your startup, your life. Imagine your next project treated like a motor pool. Parts you already know, tools you already have, instructions future you will thank present you for writing. Momentum is not magic. It's design. Now it's your turn. In the comments, tell me where you've seen simplicity beat sophistication in the real world. Was it a tool, a process, a plan that just worked because it didn't try to be clever? Or tell me where complexity cost you, what you'd redesign to make the newcomer win on day one. If this deep dive gave you a new lens on World War II and on everything that came after, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. We've got more myths to test, more machines to open up, more decisions to put under a brighter light. Your support keeps these stories rolling, and your comments make them better. I read them all. I'll leave you with the line that became a compass for a generation of mechanics and managers alike. Spin steel instead of blood, thought instead of luck, simplicity instead of swagger. If that resonates, you know what to do. Join the crew, share this with a friend who loves history, and I'll meet you in the next one. Picture a muddy Italian switchback in spring when a mountain tries to slide down the mountain. A rear-drive light car approaches with careful dignity, coaxed along by a driver who knows all the tricks, momentum, feathered throttle, a prayer for traction. Halfway up, the slope steals his speed. Wheels spin. Sand becomes soup. He rocks it. He digs it. He stops. Minutes later, a square-faced 4x4 trundles the same path at a walking pace. Front axle tugging. Low range murmuring. Tires finding whatever honesty the ground is left to offer. No drama. No applause. Just forward. Now, take that moment and repeat it 1,000 different ways. Across dunes that behave like water. Across farm tracks that become rivers in the dark. Across snowpack that hides stone sharp enough to split an oil pan. The dials don't change. The lever pattern doesn't change. The faith doesn't change. A simple system performs a complex task because it refuses to pretend it's complicated. That refusal is contagious. A driver who trusts the machine becomes the kind of driver who watches the road, not the dashboard, who notices the ambush, the glint, the shadow where there wasn't a shadow a second ago. A sergeant who trusts the machine stops hoarding vehicles as precious and starts treating them as tools. A commander who trusts the machine pushes the timetable because mobility is no longer a rumor. It's a promise kept. Follow the promise into a supply column at night. There's the smell again. Diesel, canvas, hot rubber. And the sound that becomes a lullaby if you sleep beside it long enough. Engines in staggered chorus. The convoy moves by doctrine and by intimacy. Doctrine says keep interval. Intimacy says when a road kinks, line up tight so the man behind you can see your blackout slits. Doctrine says check loads. Intimacy says retighten the strap on the corner where the crate always creeps. Simplicity shapes both kinds of knowledge. When a latch is always the same, the hand always knows where it is. You can even see simplicity from the air. Look down on a beachhead a day. After the first wave, the geometry is brutal and beautiful. Artificial harbors made from tamed ship husks snare the tide and turn surf into road. Floating piers accept cargoes exact to the inch. Trucks peel off and aim inland as if magnetized. And everywhere, small 4x4s swarm like bees, each carrying officers, maps, wires, stretchers, boxes of ammo, bags of bread news. They don't ask the beach for permission. They distribute purpose. Here's a micro story from a depot that could be anywhere. A jeep arrives with a limp, a steering knuckle leaking a thin line of glittering oil. The mechanic doesn't sigh. He doesn't reach for a prayer. He reaches for the same size wrench he reached for yesterday. The parts room hands over a seal that fits because it fits across the fleet. The manual shows a drawing that feels like a friend, fasteners numbered, order of operations written like a recipe. The repair is done before the driver's cigarette burns his fingers. The vehicle is not. Honored. The schedule is honored. The mission thanks them both. This is how abundance behaves when it is well-bred. It does not sit in mountains to impress auditors. It flows. It creates habits that outlast the reason they were born. That's why the lessons marched home with the men who learned them. Into night schools, into factory committees, into design reviews where someone finally dared to ask, what if the man in the field matters more than the man at the drafting table? In the years after the guns fell quiet, arguments raged in calmer rooms. Should we return to the old way, handwork and pride, or codify what we learned the hard way? The compromise that won wasn't really a compromise. It was a synthesis. Keep the precision where it pays. Spin it where it buys reliability. Replace it where a fixture and a gauge can guarantee more for less. The vehicles that rolled out of that philosophy didn't feel cheap. They felt honest. They felt like the manuals that trained a generation. Confident, clear, unwilling to waste your time. There's a temptation, even now, to explain victory as if it were a single shiny thing. A tank model, a plane, a code. The truth is less photogenic and more powerful. Victory is an ecosystem. The humble truck, the humble kin, the humble manual. The ghost of a philosophy that says good design is mercy made of metal. A historian once sat with generals who had lost and asked them to point at what had impressed them most. They didn't choose the monsters. They chose the servant, because everywhere they turned, the servant was already there, underfoot, ahead, behind, carrying, fetching, scouting, rescuing, never rare, never late for long. Its strength was not its strength. Its strength was its number, its manners, and its refusal to be temperamental. If you want to test the thesis, try removing it from any story you tell about that war and see what collapses. Staff rides in a different vehicle. Patrols set off in fewer numbers, make fewer detours, arrive later. Wounded wait longer. Wires take longer to lay. Messages arrive late or not at all. Logistics slows enough that the other side gets a vote it didn't have before. The small machine is not the hero, but without it the hero loses his cape. Now listen for the click of a ratchet in peacetime. A factory floor worker turns to an apprentice and says, "Feel that? That's right. That's repeatable." The apprentice nods because the tool fits, the fixture holds, the part is designed to guide itself true. A designer, miles away, might never meet either of them. It doesn't matter. He left them room, and that is a kind of respect that travels by crate and survives customs. On a Saturday in the 1960s, a reunion crowd drifts out of town hall toward a museum on the corner. Inside, beneath lights that make the paint look newer than the metal beneath it feels. Willis sits like a memory you can touch. The men circle. Jokes come first, then the quiet, then the truth they can say now without anyone flinching. It was better for the war we actually fought. No one argues. Some victories you don't want to win. You want to learn from them. Learning turned out to be the greater gift. A rising generation took the rules and ran with them. Standardize across platforms, simplify access, design for manufacture, document for the exhausted, across assembly lines. In office floors, those rules turned complexity into choreography. And when the next crisis came, not a war, but a demand spike, a supply shock, a recall, the companies that had internalized the motor pool's religion bent without breaking. That's the quiet dividend of humility. We should bring the camera in for a last close-up, a hand in a glove reaching into an engine bay and finding a bolt without looking. That is what this whole tale has been about. The hand trusts the design trusts the hand. And between them, they keep something larger alive. Momentum, morale, and nation's nerve. If this perspective shifted the way you see the ground truth of World War II and the ground truth of how we build today, tell me what moment hit you hardest. Was it the single lever that made for wheels pull? The manual that taught at a glance? The convoy that looked like a moving city? Drop your take in the comments and argue for it. This channel lives on that kind of debate. And if you want more history told from the bolts outward, stories that start at the shop bench and end at the map table, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. It tells the algorithm what the Jeep told the desert. Keep moving. Here's the last turn of the wrench. The part where lessons stop being history and start being instructions. Stand again beside that square-shouldered little truck. Don't look at the badge. Look at the choices. A bolt you can reach with frozen fingers. A lever that tells the truth every time. Parts that don't care where they were made because they all fit the same way. Those choices are not accidents. They're values poured into metal. Now pan the camera over a modern city. Any of them rebuilt from rubble into rhythm. Buses kneel for passengers because someone designed for the user, not the brochure. Appliances open with ordinary tools because someone respected the technician. Workflows click because designers honor the idea that tomorrow's tired hands should still win. That is the Jeep's quiet legacy. A culture of mercy for the person doing the work. Return once more to the men who lived the lesson the hard way. A former field mechanic stands in a bright training bay with young technicians waiting, notebooks open. He lifts a simple part, a filter that fits across 3 engines, and says, "Every time we make something common, we make someone's day shorter and the system stronger." He chalks 3 words on a board: clarity, access, repeatability. He explains that clarity is manuals that teach at a glance. Access is parts you can reach without surgery. Repeatability is a promise that what worked yesterday works today. The students nod because they already know the opposite wastes lives in war and life in peace. Let's take one last trip down a supply road. Not in 44, but in your own life. Think about the project you keep delaying. What if you apply the motor pool creed? Standardize what you can, simplify what you can't, and multiply the effort that works. That is how small wins become a convoy. There's a final image I want you to carry. A rain-slick street, headlights smeared by weather, and a line of vehicles moving with gentle inevitability. Invisible are the choices that made it possible. The shared parts, the shared procedures, the shared language of do it this way, so anyone can. That's the victory we rarely celebrate. Not the dramatic, but the dependable. Not the glamorous, but the generous. A museum door closes behind the last of the reunion crowd. The hall falls quiet. The Willys sits as it always has, unimpressed with itself, unimpressed with us. It does not need applause. It needs a job. That's why it won the war it never bragged about. So here is the distilled truth, the one that belongs on a shop wall, a whiteboard, or the inside of your skull. Designed for the world you will face, not the world you prefer. Respect the user. Respect the fixer. Respect the clock. Make movement easy, maintenance obvious, and multiplication inevitable. Do that, and deserts turn into roads. Do that, and shortages turn into schedules. Do that, and history stops feeling like fate and starts feeling like a set of choices you can make on purpose. Now I want you in this conversation. Tell me in the comments, which lesson hits you hardest? Clarity, access, or repeatability? And where have you seen it change the outcome? Share a story from your own motor pool, whether it was a garage, a kitchen, a factory, or a classroom. Your examples teach the rest of us. If this episode gave you a new way to read World War II, from the bolts outward, from the manuals up, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm to keep our convoy moving. Share this with a friend who loves the ground truth, not just the glossy myth. We've got more to open, more to test, and more to learn. I'll see you in the next one, where we take another machine apart and find the philosophy inside. Until then, keep it simple, keep it serviceable, keep it moving. Let's take the camera down to ground level and meet the supporting cast that made the square-fingered Scout more than a mascot. Made it a movement. Start with a can. Not glamorous, not loud. Just just a rectangle with a clever mouth. 2 men can carry it at a run. It stacks like bricks. It pours clean even when the road is a rumor at. First, some commanders sniff at copying an enemy's container. Then they do the math. Suddenly, fuel moves like language. Fast, familiar, everywhere. 1,000 engines think a shape no one came to the war to admire. Now a road made of trucks. Picture a ribbon across a continent, headlights close enough to feel each other's heat in the damp night air. The drivers are young. Many are new to the wheel. All learn the creed. Keep interval. Keep moving. Keep the river from breaking. They are not famous. They do not want to be. They want to make the morning attack possible and the evening meal hot. If one truck dies, 2 fold the gap and the line heals by habit. Pan left to a harbor that wasn't there yesterday. Sunken hulls chained into walls. Steel roads riding the tide. Cranes that learn to dance in a storm. The beach becomes a throat, and through it flows everything an army needs to keep its nerve. The small 4x4 scurries along this new coastline, like a punctuation mark, making sentences out of chaos. This way, that unit, now. Spin inland to a field telephone line snaking through hedgerows. The men laying it ride the same little machines, hop off, set poles, coil wire, hop back on. The pattern repeats until maps become networks and commanders talk as if distance is a suggestion. Simple vehicles, multiply complicated effects. Here's a field vignette. A scout section finds a bridge that looks tired. The corporal doesn't like the way the boards complain under boots. He waves. Up a pair of 4x4s, nose to nose. Winches talking. Planks lift, braces reset, weight distributed. 10 minutes later, a column crosses something that was almost a problem. Almost is what simplicity buys you. Problems solved before they grow teeth. Another vignette. A medic kneels in sleet, gloved hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. The stretcher bracket that never changes is exactly where it should be on the little truck's flank. Latch, lift, slide, secure. He doesn't have to think. He saves thinking for the patient's breath. One more. A forward air controller needs eyes over the tree lean yesterday. He rides out in a small open car with a radio in the back and a map under his knee. The driver knows the lever dance. The wheels know the ruts. A squadron turns because 2 men arrived on time in a machine designed to treat bad ground like an argument it can win. These are not miracles. They're policies expressed in metal. And policies echo. When the war's noise fades, the lessons don't. Designers start asking new questions in quiet rooms. Can this gasket fit across 3 engines? Can this loom use the same colors across a range? Can a manual show the step that always gets skipped? Each yes shortens a workday and lengthens a system's patience. Each yes is a small victory with compound interest. We should talk about pride, the good kind, not the peacetime swagger of polishing a solution no user asked for. The pride of a mechanic who closes a hood knowing the next pair of hands will recognize every choice. The pride of a driver who trusts the lever. The pride of a quartermaster who knows the bin label matches reality. This kind of pride is quiet, and it wins, if you want to. See how quickly a philosophy travels. Watch a factory that used to make one thing awkwardly learn to make many things gracefully. Watch fixtures replace luck. Watch designers fall in love with reach and clearance. Watch a culture discover that clarity is not condescension. It's respect. By now you know why the square-faced scout became the veteran's answer to the historian's question. It wasn't the horsepower. It wasn't the top speed. It was the honesty, a machine that told the truth about what it would face and was built accordingly. So let's turn the spotlight on you for a second. In your world, your shop, your classroom, your team, what's your one honest lever? What's the simple control that, when you reach for it, makes everything else easier? Tell me in the comments. I want examples from kitchens to code bases, where simplicity beats sophistication in a fair fight. And if this boots on the ground tour change how you read the war, from the bolts outward, from the manuals up, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so the algorithm keeps our convoy rolling. Share this with someone who loves the unglamorous truth. We've got more to open, more to test, and more to demystify. Because history is clearer when you can reach the bolts without removing half the engine.